Hello everyone, my name is Paul Guyad and I'll be teaching you about Python lists today. Just to let you know, I'm on Replit.com. It's a great online IDE, integrated development environment. You can code in virtually any language on Replit.com. It's a really neat tool. I highly recommend it. And just some background about myself. I have a bachelor's degree in economics, an MBA, and I'm currently working on my master's in computer science. So I'm really familiar with a lot of the concepts that we're going to be learning today. Let's dive in. Does anyone have a guess as to what a Python list is? So a list is similar to a JavaScript array or a Python array. It's a single variable that can store multiple pieces of data. So you're wondering what might we use it for? And you can imagine, right, all of the practical uses for it. If you think about like a student-teacher database that stores the grades of the students in one column, if you wanted to export that column, it might be useful to use a Python list, right? Because they're all, just really easy to just take them out of the database and put them into a list to use them, maybe manipulate them, take the average of them, things like that. You can think of all the retail transactions that occur on e-commerce every day and all that data that needs to be stored that's of the same type, the price or the cost or the, quantity. They would want to be stored in lists, right? So, however, I don't mean to mislead you to think that lists have to be of the same data type, all the elements in it have to be the same data type, because that's not true. A list can actually store multiple different data types within the same variable. So let's look at that right now, actually, on line 16. That's an example of what I'm talking about. The first element is 1, which is an integer. The second element is horse, which is a string, and we know that because the defining character of a string is the double quotes and the single quotes. And then the third element is true, which is a Boolean. So does anyone know what element, what index the first element of a list is at? So if you said 1, nice try, but in computer science, lists and arrays and similar data types of the sort, their index, the first element is at index 0. So first, let's take a look at this list, and it shows exactly what we have written on line 16. And then on line 27, we're accessing the first element of the list, because as we just said, the first element is at index 0. And notice the square brackets that I'm using. So num is going to have that first element stored within it, which is the number 1. So when we print num, it's going to show the number 1. Great. Let's just pause and take a look again at the syntax. Notice the square brackets of the list on line 16. Notice the comma separators. And then we do want to point out the print function. It's very important. A function is also referred to as a method. Print is not called on any variable. You just say the word print, and then you print what you want to print. Notice the parentheses. The parentheses are the defining character of a function or method. And we can use print for debugging. That's really a big practical use of print, is for debugging. If output is not showing as you would like, and you think that something's going on with your algorithm, then you would use print at certain points in your algorithm to see how the data is being manipulated. So those are some key points. And again, right, the first element is at index 0. So that's why 1 printed, because it's at the first index. It's at index 0. Let's continue. We can also use negative indexing to access the elements in a list. So here we have on line 33, my list -1, and you look at that and you're kind of like, wow, what could that mean? And it really just means the first from the back of the list. So true is the first from the back. So that's what's going to print here. Let's see if that happens. And it does. And we can imagine, let's change this. Let's change it to -2. So you would think of true as -1, then horse is probably -2. So let's see that. And it is. So that's just a bit about negative indexing. We can also access a range in a Python list. So let me write the note as we move along here that the first part of the range is included, but the second part of the range is excluded. So what that means is that the element at index 0, which is 1, is included. However, the element at index 2 is excluded. So true will not show up. So what this is going to print is a list that has 1 and horse in it, because horse is at index 1, which is also included in addition to the 0. It's just the 2 that's excluded, just because that's the rules of this range syntax of the Python language. So let's see 1, horse show up in the list. And it does. Great. Just as we expected. Now we want to change a value in a list. So the way we're going to do that is use the variable name, mylist. Always, when thinking about lists, you should be thinking about square brackets. And we're going to use the index that we want to change, the index of the element that we want to change, and then the assignment operator and the new value. So here we are replacing true, because it's at index 2, with false. So let's see that the new list is 1, horse, false. And there it is. Does anyone have any questions so far about any of these concepts? Okay, let's continue. Now I know a question that may have popped into your head, but you just maybe didn't know how to word it or something, is what would happen if you specify an index that is outside of, the range of the list, right? So this list only has indices 0, 1, and 2. So what if I said, index 11, right? The computer doesn't, the compiler does not compute, an index of 11 on my list, because it doesn't exist. So it's going to bring up an index error. Now, reading error messages is so important to understanding computer science concepts better and better. And sometimes we have to know how to read them so that we know how to debug and fix the problem. So here it is pretty straightforward. We have index error, line 45. It tells us exactly where it is, which is true, line 45. And it says list assignment index out of range. So that's very straightforward. We know exactly what they're talking about. So instead of 11, we're going to change it to an index that actually exists, like 1. Horse is going to turn into tree, and then we're going to print my list to see that that change happened. And it did. Now, I have changed the data types with similar data, with the same data type. So let me just show you that that doesn't have to be the case. I can replace horse with the number 41. It doesn't have to be a string. Let's see that. There you go. So we're making it through smoothly. Now, the last thing I want to talk about with Python lists is inserting items into the list. So to do that, we use the dot insert method. Now notice we know it's a method because of the parentheses. As I mentioned before, the parentheses are the signature of the function when you know there's a function. Notice how insert is called on a list. That's how I would say it, because you see it's mylist.insert instead of just saying insert like we see when we see print. You know, you don't have to call print on anything, you just say print. But notice how insert, you have to call it on a list. Continuing with the concept, we have 2 parameters for the insert method, and parameters can also be referred to as arguments. The first argument is the index at which you want to insert the new element, and we have specified index 2 here. Let's go back up to the list. Index 2 is currently true. So this new value is going to come before true and after horse, so that it fits right into index 2. And the new value is the number 19. So let's remove the comment. Again, you've probably noticed that commenting in Python comes by way of the # or the hashtag. So we're inserting, again, we're inserting into my list at index 2 the number 19. Yeah, you know, that's how you should process it. Think about it when you go back and review. And then we're printing my list. So my list, can anyone guess what my list should say now? That's right, 1, 41, 19, false. So let's see that happen. Okay, great. So just to recap what we've learned today, a list in Python is similar to a JavaScript array. It's a single variable that can store multiple pieces of data. And we would want that because you could imagine a list of grades. We could calculate the average of those grades. We could total the grades. We could find the median of the grades, or transactions stored in a list, like the prices of transactions. So we could find our average selling price of certain products. And then, so that's how lists are practical. And then we saw the syntax of the list, and we saw that you can actually mix data types in a list. They don't, all of the elements in the list don't have to be the same data type. We had 1 as an int, horse as a string, and true as a Boolean, proving that that was the case. The signature mark of the list is the square brackets and the comma separators. We noticed that to access elements in the list, we use the name of the list on line 27 I'm looking at now. We use the square brackets and then the index that we wanted to access. So my list 0 would print 1. We saw the use of negative indexing, -1. If you wanted to access the last element of the list, you could use -1. If you didn't know how many elements were in the list and you wanted to access the last element, it would make sense, right, to use -1. So that's where it comes in handy. I changed it to -2, but yep, we had it at -1. And we learned about changing values in the list, again with the bracket notation and the assignment operator. Index error came when the index was out of bounds, like there's no index 12 in my list, so that would cause an index error. And finally, inserting, we use the insert function. The index of the element, the index at which we want to insert, and the second parameter was the actual element that we wanted to insert. Thank you for watching my lecture about Python lists, and I hope you tune in again soon. Goodbye.